Hello and welcome to the Series B podcast. I'm your host, Greg Pokricki. Your guest today is Sarah Tanbakuchi-Ripa, CEO of the 43North Foundation. On this episode, we discuss the Foundation's investment pillars, Radial Ventures, Tech Buffalo, Series B, and corporate connectivity, and cast a vision for what Buffalo looks like in 2035 if they're successful. All right, Sarah, thank you very much for joining us today. Really appreciate your time.
Oh, Greg, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be on the podcast.
So for the uninitiated, what is the 43North Foundation?
So the 43North Foundation is a really, really unique foundation. We exist because of the success of the 43North competition. So those portfolio companies that have been successful, including ACV, the proceeds were put into a foundation with the mission of making sure we can scale and create a thriving innovation ecosystem and really thriving innovation economy here in Western New York. And people are usually like, well, that's broad. What exactly does that mean?
Right.
And, we have this foundational belief that from an economic development perspective, it is great companies that really, at its heart, transform communities. So the foundation is all about creating those conditions that enable great companies to grow and thrive. And so that has manifested itself in a series of pillars that we support and invest in to create that thriving innovation economy and that thriving tech and entrepreneurial ecosystem here in Western New York. And we can definitely dive into those. But I think what is truly, truly amazing is that our foundation, we exist because of the success of the entrepreneurial ecosystem here in Western New York. And we're able to take those proceeds and give them back to the community in really strategic ways to allow us to thrive as an ecosystem, thrive as a community, and continue our next generation of prosperity.
I think most people listening will have heard or know that 43North is coming up on its finals event. And, we had an event a couple of weeks or month ago called The New Playbook, where we started to talk about the transition from 43North proper and the pitch competition to the work of the 43North Foundation. Maybe for someone that's skeptical or hasn't, heard the pitch at some of these events or read one of the articles before, like, why do you think now is the right time for that pivot to this new playbook and new model of building the ecosystem?
I think now is the right time because we're ready. The analogy we often talk about is if you think of some of the most successful companies in the world, they would never do the same thing over and over again for a decade plus. They're constantly looking about how they evolve so that they're able to grow. You think about Netflix. Netflix is a classic example, the red DVDs onto the streaming platforms that you see today. And so the 43North competition has enabled so much success. They set out with this competition and accelerator program with so many other assets and programs within the ecosystem to create a sustainable tech and entrepreneurial ecosystem, to put Buffalo on the map, to attract some incredible companies, to create that brand that is Buffalo and everything we do from a startups and tech and innovation perspective. And it did that. It was successful. And we should celebrate that. And we are going to celebrate that. I mean, the finals is going to be incredible. I hope, everyone is able to make sure they're at this. And it's really a wonderful moment for our community. And also because of that success, because of what we kind of call this phase one, it's now time to look at phase two and evolve. And that's really diving into making sure the conditions that create a thriving ecosystem are set up to be sustainable and are set up to scale. And that really ends up underpinning the four sort of foundational, not to use the word foundational, but the four foundational or pillar aspects of the 43North Foundation strategy. So if anyone was kind of skeptical, or I would say, oh my goodness, there's so much to celebrate over the past 10 to 12 years. And so many organizations, even beyond sort of the 43North family writ large, that have participated in this moment and have gotten us to this place. And it's truly a magnificent story when you really think about it, against all odds.
So you talk about creating the conditions for this innovation ecosystem to thrive and really go to this next level here in the era of the 43North Foundation. Let the audience know, what those kind of pillars are, what the conditions are that we're trying to create through our work, and how you landed on them. I know you
Mhm.
know, traveled to other ecosystems and talked to folks all over the country. Like, what are the patterns that you recognize that made you and the 43 North Foundation board and rest of the staff, um, sure that these were the right targets to go after?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really good question. So I'll start first with the pillars. So there are four pillars that comprise the 43 North Foundation and really enable our mission. And so the first is we are investing in building Western New York's first ever venture studio. So this, put simply, is a company designed to create great companies deeply rooted in Western New York. So it's comprised of a team of experienced entrepreneurs, experienced software engineers, experienced designers, et cetera, who have done this before. They've built and scaled companies, and they've put together an AI-centric platform and approach to building and scaling companies, all with this idea of how do we create the next great unicorns deeply rooted in Buffalo and do it faster and with a higher likelihood of scaling to success. So that is Venture Studio in a nutshell. And that is really the flagship investment of the 43 North Foundation in its first couple years here. Secondarily, we're invested deeply in talent, and this manifests through our partnership with Tech Buffalo and really looking at how we create the operational fuel. So this is the talent pipeline that enables great companies to grow and scale here in Western New York. And so I think a point of really interesting differentiation here is that we are very focused on not just immediate talent available for hire by companies, but how do you invest further upstream into the K through 12 system to make sure, particularly in this age of unbelievably fast transformation with AI and what it means for talent and what it means for the skill sets that will enable people to succeed, the Western New York area is set up for success. So that's the second pillar. The third is we have launched the first ever digital platform called Series B, focused on storytelling exclusively around tech innovation and entrepreneurship in Buffalo. And this is more than just about 43 North. This is the ecosystem writ large. So all the assets that do this incredible work to make sure we're telling our story loudly and proudly for all to hear. And then finally, we're investing in the fourth pillar, which is corporate connectivity. And so this is a targeted campaign designed to make sure established companies in our community understand why a healthy, thriving innovation ecosystem is so important for their success and why they should be engaging and making it as easy as possible to engage in the startup ecosystem here in Western New York. So there's a lot of work that underpins those pillars. And but those investments are really intentional and based on, Greg, to the second part of your question, um, really studying other ecosystems and other communities across the US and trying to understand what were those essential elements of success.
Yeah. So let's dive into each of those kind of one by one. So starting with Radial Ventures, like, why do you think the venture studio model is the right move for spinning out new companies and, to your point, doing so faster?
I think what's really interesting about the venture studio model is this idea, and the venture studio team, which is led by Dan Magnashevsky, they collectively studied venture studio models across the US to put together the best components into what Buffalo's version of this should be. And what I think is really interesting about the venture studio model is the acceleration aspect of this. There are so many, when you found a company and go to scale it, there's so many common patterns of mistakes that you can see that can really either reduce the likelihood of success or make that path to success a lot longer and harder. And so the concept of a venture studio idea is like taking these tested, tried and true professionals, putting them together collectively to say, you've done this before, you understand the patterns, you understand the elements of success, and those are repeatable over different companies and different concepts. So repeat that faster, and with these learnings and with this knowledge, and enable creating more companies deeply rooted in Buffalo. And I think that's a really big key here too, is that we want to create the companies that are going to be HQ'd here. They want to stay here and they want to invest here because they are able to see that, the community's success is their success and vice versa. So degree of dedication and understanding, sort of that interplay between companies that are successful, that really scale, and what that means in terms of their responsibility as a corporate citizen to the community to give back and bring them along with them.
And then let's pivot to Tech Buffalo on the talent ecosystem. here within Western New York. Obviously, you were previously the CEO of Tech Buffalo, so you're intimately aware of the importance of talent to our ecosystem and the work that the organization has done since its founding. From your perspective now as the CEO of the foundation, like what do we as a market need to do differently on talent to reach that next level growth?
Yeah, I feel like this is the part where I should be like, now I get to ask you questions as representing Tech Buffalo.
As I
I
wear
think this
my
is,
Tech Buffalo vest. Yeah.
I actually think this is a good moment to kind of pause and really talk about some of the examples of places we studied. So we really look toward models in Utah, for example, the Salt Lake City ecosystem and the Indianapolis ecosystem, and how they thought about talent and the creation of talent pipelines. TechPoint in Indianapolis is a great example of an organization that when Tech Buffalo is really coming up and figuring out how it best serves the Western New York community, that we looked at for best practices and understanding how they create talent pipelines that serve both the community, but also ultimately at the end of the day, the employer, and how they also push their employers to be ahead of the curve and thinking about changes that were coming in talent and skilling, right? To think differently about that too. So I think that's where like the TechPoint model really helped us think through how do you engage employers? How do you think proactively about creating talent pipelines that end up producing talent that's ahead of the curve? And how do you get employers to come together and realize that they have a collective interest in working together to create this talent pipeline? And so TechPoint is a really good model to look at some of those best practices and programs that they've created over the years. The time we spent in Salt Lake City in Utah, actually going out and visiting and meeting with the leaders there, really showed us how intentional they were about thinking earlier in the pipeline and thinking strategically about, at the time, making sure in K through 12, computer science was an integral part of the curriculum in every grade, observing how the employers really pushed that mandate in collaboration with educational leaders in the state of Utah, and thinking about how we translate those components here to Tech Buffalo, really. And so the 43 North Foundation was thrilled to fund the work of Tech Buffalo. And I think under Jeffrey Boderin's leadership, Jeffrey came in with deep expertise in creating talent pipelines and thinking about creating those pipelines in middle school, high school, and even earlier. We've been excited to fund what that looks like for Buffalo, and that's manifested itself in a whole bunch of ways. The Innovation Fellows program, I think, is a really, really great example of some of the work that Tech Buffalo has done in terms of investing in educators across, I might not get these stats exactly right, but it's 20 plus, or it's a dozen plus school districts, 20 plus educators in the first phase, right?
Right.
Connecting those educators with, leading technologists from Microsoft and beyond to figure out how do you meaningfully plug tech and now AI components into classroom learning, but allowing it to be an educator-led effort where we're really listening to the educators and understanding what is their day-to-day like in the classroom, what struggles do they come up against, and how do we best equip the next generation of learners with the skills they need. So whether it's the Innovation Fellowship, it's the work you've done in expanding Family Code Night, it's the intentionality around how you're engaging with employers to build pathways. Tech Buffalo is a really vital partner to helping us create that talent ecosystem here in Western New York in really meaningful ways. And I think like over the past 12 months, you've touched nearly 8,000 students and parents through your programs in terms of gaining exposure to tech-aligned skill sets. It's just incredible progress for the organization, and we're thrilled to support it.
Throughout that answer there on talent and everything you said previously about the venture studio, you mentioned like elevating and following employer demand on aligning our talent ecosystem to their needs and on the venture studio side, creating companies that want to be rooted in here in Western New York that can then tap into that talent. Wondering if now is a good time to pivot into the importance you all have placed on corporate connectivity, and what you saw in other markets that maybe those communities have done really well that you'd like for us to aspire to and create here in Western New York.
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's one that I think requires a thoughtful answer, because it's all about where an ecosystem is in its evolution and maturation. And I tell this story quite a bit, but when we were in Utah in Salt Lake City, the Qualtrics team was really generous with their time. So this is a company that we visited out. I'm sure it's a name very familiar to your listeners. Really successful growth story. And foundational really to the development of Utah's ecosystem. And so we spent some time with Ryan Smith and, we asked him, what do you view as the essential elements of an ecosystem and its success? And he gave a really thoughtful answer. And the part that I remembered the most is that he said, business drives change, full stop. Business drives change. That was number one. Then he said, talent is everything as the second component, and then success begets success. And it was just such a simple, straightforward answer. And what really stuck with me, though, was that first line. At the end of the day, business drives change. Like, yes, you need a collaborative group of stakeholders at the table driving an ecosystem strategy. But at the end of the day, no matter what ecosystem you look at, when eventually you peel back the layers, it's usually a couple key business leaders who have come together and said, how do we think about transforming the community or transforming this ecosystem? Because at the end of the day, it also helps our companies succeed and thrive. And that really, is economic development when you think about it. So that thesis or that approach or those elements, however you want to look at it, is something that I have consistently seen pop up time and time again. Is just this idea that business drives change. And if you think about business leaders, they are really uniquely suited to be the ones to drive change or transformation and bring others along with them. That doesn't mean the business leader has to be out in front, right? But they are uniquely situated with resources, learnings, and access to help really spearhead and transform that. And if you believe that talent is a community's most enduring asset, as we do as I do, then you can really kind of see that connectivity between talent, a business's success, and then thinking about how an ecosystem evolves to thrive. So that is very kind of like, I don't know, you might argue that's a little bit theoretical, but that's kind of the underpinnings and just based on the experience of what we've seen. And so in Western New York, we have observed an orientation of more established businesses looking at the startup ecosystem in some ways as less a strategic benefit and more something that they support from perhaps a charitable construct. And that's an overarching painting that is not fair, because if you spend time looking at Series B, for example, you'll see a lot of really interesting case studies with companies who got it early and got it and engaged in really meaningful ways. But when we look at corporate connectivity, this is about how we help our established corporate community come to view a thriving innovation economy, not as a source of competition, but as a source of value, like to find the true value proposition in making sure this work is successful. And then here's the other learning that we found when we looked at other communities. When they asked their more established businesses from more legacy industries, for example, to engage in the startup ecosystem, they made it so easy to engage in the talent programming, to be first customer at a startup. They just made it seamless. And that sort of um, concierge-like service doesn't really exist right now in Western New York. So those two aspects, those two elements. So the fact that established businesses understand the value prop of a thriving innovation ecosystem, and they have ways to very easily engage, not from just a charitable perspective, but because they truly see the value in it for their business. Those are the two elements that really underpin corporate connectivity, which is led by John Gavigan. And, we also need to make sure in the process of rolling it out, because it's kind of it's a unique pillar, it's a unique aspect of the work. We also need to make sure we're really listening to the corporate community and we're very responsive to them. And we hear, what do they know about startups, tech and innovation in Western New York? What do they want to know? Where do they see opportunities to engage? And we really believe talent's probably the tip of the spear from that perspective, but that is, we need to meaningfully engage and check that hypothesis and make sure that rings true. And so that has manifested itself in the launching of our first ever corporate ambassador program. which is now at 150 C-suite leaders strong, of business leaders who have raised their hand and said, we're interested in this work that you're doing. Help us understand how we get engaged, and how we really cheerlead and support the work of the foundation and the ecosystem writ large.
And then the final pillar, obviously I saved the selfish promo for last here as we are on the Series B podcast, is Series B and the idea of storytelling. I think it's super unique to have put the resources behind it as the foundation has and really embed it in the strategy. We had 80 economic developers from across the country here a couple weeks ago for a national talent attraction summit, where people from doing basically our work in other communities came to Western New York to share tips and learn from each other. And I think pretty across the board, people were wowed by the work that we've done at Series B and at Dan Miner's presentation that he gave at the conference. And I think it's a pretty unique lens through which to change the perception of a region, right? And not just do so kind of in a half-hearted way, but to really put like the strength of the resources of the foundation behind it and create something really special. Why did you think that was important from the foundation, and what's the story you want people to know about Buffalo that is like uniquely Buffalo, but also an aspirational vision of what we want to become?
It's you know, storytelling, it's so interesting. We were really intentional before we launched Series B and before we launched the platform to spend some time understanding how Buffalo is perceived outside of Western New York, and also how are other communities doing their storytelling. And what we found is that Buffalo's had some really great coverage around singular wins, but there was no overarching narrative that helps stitch together this story of what tech innovation and entrepreneurship means to us, to our community, and why we're differentiated as a place to really build your career, build your company, build your legacy. And when people were asked questions about what is Buffalo, usually what came back was something about the Bills or something about the weather. And
Right.
we also found that other communities that were perhaps not as well equipped with sort of the thoroughness of support from an ecosystem perspective were storytelling and punching way above their weight, compared to Buffalo. So that really helped us validate this idea that, yes, there's room and a need for a storytelling platform that's 100% dedicated to the community story around tech innovation and entrepreneurship. And that was what helped us launch essentially this concept of Series B, which is branded Series B because of this idea. I mean, yes, B for Buffalo, that's helpful, of course. But going back to the concept and the question you asked in the beginning of the interview, like finals, why is it ready for us to evolve? We really feel like the last 10 to 12 years, we made it through our Series A, and now we're well positioned for Series B, which is focused on that scaling the narrative and story that is Buffalo around tech innovation and entrepreneurship. So that is, and I think like we're very intentional when we use those three elements because we want to tell stories about tech, which is more than just startups and more than just entrepreneurship. We want to tell stories about the incredible founders and companies that we have here. And then we want to tell stories about innovation writ large and what that looks like within startups, but also what it looks like within established companies, because that all stitches together to tell the story to sort of your overarching question of why Series B and why storytelling, of why Buffalo is the best place to build, and whether that's build your career, build your company, or honestly, build your legacy. Buffalo is an incredible community to have meaningful impact quickly compared to other cities that you can go and live in and have those aspects of intangible quality of life that really kind of come together to build a legacy or build a life. And so telling that story so that Buffalo is not kind of the best kept secret, but is able to compete really on what makes this community truly one of a kind is what Series B aspires to do. And it's been 6 months in the market, and as with the launch of any type of product, it's doing that well. We're also learning a ton along the way and how to reach audiences, what stories really resonate, and, Greg, you help support building this asset as well. So here's another point where I could be like, "So how do you think it's going?"
Yeah, I've spoken at conferences before and done like what do you think of when you think of Buffalo? And to your point, it's bills, it's chicken wings, and it's snow. And I think a big part of the work is just changing the B-roll in people's heads that they roll when they think of a community. I always tell people like if I said Nashville, you would have something in your head. If I said Atlanta, you would have something in your head. If I say Buffalo, you have snow, chicken wings, and the Bills. And like, how do we change the way in which you're picturing this community? So I think it's exciting from the foundation perspective because kind of through the other three pillars, we're doing the work of creating these amazing stories and creating the conditions for these amazing stories to exist. And then through Series B, we get to tell those stories and start to kick off that flywheel effect where we really, um, really spur some real transformation.
Mhm. I couldn't agree more. And I think Series V is so interesting too as a feedback mechanism. I mean, that is the one area where we can most immediately incorporate the feedback from the community around what stories they like, what stories remain untold. It's an incredible testing ground for that narrative of Buffalo that truly resonates both within our existing community and then also outside of Western New York as well. So it's been a really, in terms of a lot of our investments from the foundation perspective are long-term investments. Like Talent Pipeline is a great example. When you think about the talent pipeline, that K through 12 investment can take a generation to bear fruit. But with the Series B, the storytelling aspect, I mean, that is it's something that we got into market within 6 months. It's now been live 6 months, and you can see what's working, what's not, where we need to adjust. So, in terms of, when folks always ask, how can we help? How can we engage? My first response is spend some time with Series B. Let us know what we're getting right and let us know what we're getting wrong or where we have opportunities to improve.
You mentioned the ways in which some of the other investments are, long term. Like it could take years to see that, sixth grader that we're getting involved in a tech club to really make a meaningful change in our workforce and, venture studio as much as it exists to churn out companies fast, it still takes some time to get things going. I know the idea of the foundation is to spend this money basically over 10 years, right? And see a real transformation for Buffalo in its quote unquote Series B, its second phase here. Um, as you look down the road at Buffalo, 2036, what do you think Buffalo needs to look like for you to feel like we did it? We made a transformation.
Yeah, it's an important question and one we spend a lot of time thinking about and talking about at the foundation. I mean, we're really making, like you mentioned, it's $100 million investment over 10 years. That is the largest single investment in entrepreneurship, tech, and innovation that our community's ever seen. And the potential to unlock generational prosperity is unprecedented and transformational. And so if we were sitting, 10 years from now, what I really hope we're looking at is a community that's had at least three other successful unicorns that have meaningfully accelerated that flywheel of ecosystem success that so many entrepreneurs, founders, and technologists talk about. I mean, really great, innovative companies that are deeply rooted in Buffalo and have put us on the map and understand what it means to be engaged in an ecosystem. And then those companies that are thriving and those companies that are existing have the talent that they need to continue to scale and grow. I mean, that is just unquestionably so important that the talent is here that these companies need to thrive and scale and continue staying deeply rooted in Buffalo. and that we have told our story about the ecosystem loudly and proudly. So there's no longer any doubt about what makes Buffalo an incredible community and an incredible ecosystem to build in. And I also think we're talking about a component and element of cultural change as well in Buffalo, that we've transitioned from a mindset that many folks would talk about as being one of scarcity, because we were talking about decades of loss, to one of abundance, where we realize that interconnectivity between our success and that how the rising tide really lifts all ships. And so we see this community that understands its own value, how we succeed together, and how we really are capable of competing and differentiating ourselves among the best of the best. And I really want, I love to be in a position where whether it's 2035, 2036, like Buffalo has become the next great American growth story. And we have been able to take this amazing first phase, the first, 10 to 12 years prior, and really scaled it in a meaningful way. So that is what success would look like if, from my perspective, 11 years into the future.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time on the podcast and all the work you and the rest of the 43 North Foundation team is doing to affect this change. Before I let you go, we're ending every episode on a couple quick hitter questions that we call last call. So first, what is your favorite productivity tool right now?
Oh, it's a great question because I feel like we're inundated with tools right now trying to figure it out.
True.
um, yes. I so granola has been transformational despite my sort of hesitation as a former attorney around the kind of security and privacy considerations relating to recording, but the ability to track that and transform that into easily accessible notes, that's been really incredible. I know it's not exactly a new tool, and then we're really meaningfully digging into how we integrate co-work. Um, in a meaningful way into the foundation and its operations. So I have a feeling that's going to unlock a lot.
Yep. You're on a podcast right now. When you listen to podcasts or audiobooks, at what speed are you listening to them at?
1.2 to 1.5. Unless
Okay.
it's Trevor Noah's podcast, What's Next, because I just really enjoy that at its normal speed.
I feel like we talked about Trevor Noah when you were on my old podcast like 5 or 6 years ago. So that's a good callback. I'll have to go listen back to that one. And a great podcast. What is your go-to coffee order?
Oh, iced coffee right now because it's summer.
Nice choice. Last question. Most important for a Buffalo podcast, chicken wings, drumstick or flat?
I wonder what I answered last time, but I'm pretty sure I'm a fan. Well, I mean, flats right now. At this stage in my life, flats. Easier to eat, in my opinion.
All right. Good choice. Thank you so much for the time. Really appreciate it.
Oh, Greg, it's always a pleasure. Thank you for the work that you're doing here and helping share the story. And I really enjoyed the conversation.